My name is Wes Kellerman, and to save time, I will spare you the agony of reading my whole life story and keep the details of who I am concise. I'm 25 years old with short blonde hair and green eyes. I go to the gym regularly to ensure my weight doesn't get too out of control since I work night security at a local restaurant. I'm single and I spend most of my days working, sleeping, reading, and watching Netflix. Not much is going on in the life of Wes. Well, that was until recently. I found an old journal while working late at the Luna Rosa winery the other night. For those who don't know, Luna Rosa is located in Stillwater, Minnesota. In order for things to make a little more sense, I need to update you on the town's history a bit. I'm not a history buff in any way, so some details may be slightly off and I apologize for that. Stillwater was constructed on a large hillside in 1837, with a small chunk of the downtown area built into a sandstone bluff that housed a network of man-made tunnels dating back to before the 1800s. The Joseph Wolf Brewing Company bought the cave system in 1896, using the tunnels and natural springs in them to store and craft their signature beer. In 1899, 3 brewery workers stumbled upon an unmapped section of the cave. 2 of the workers were buried alive in a cave-in just minutes after the discovery. The one who survived maintained minor injuries, though a few months later was admitted to a hospital's psychiatric ward after going into a never-ending rant about a demon lurking within the depths of the cave. He disappeared a couple of weeks later. Eventually, the cave fell under the ownership of the Luna Rosa winery, and with reports of the cave being haunted, it became a popular site for visitors. That leads me back to my job, working security at the winery. Basically, I patrol the cave after hours, ensuring that nobody wanders into the cave to spend the night or steal any of the antiques. I've been monitoring the cave for 2 years without a single paranormal incident. That was until yesterday though, when I found the journal. It was around 11 p.m. and I was just making my way past the old cave-in site when I caught a movement out of the corner of my eye. I watched as some loose pebbles and dirt fell away from the larger rocks and onto the floor. Moving closer to investigate, I noticed the half-buried journal. I removed it as carefully as possible, and immediately after retrieving it, I heard a faint noise come from the other side of the rubble. I leaned forward to listen and I heard the faint sound of scraping against the rocks. "Hello?" I whispered. The scratching noise ceased abruptly, and after combing the area with my flashlight, I dismissed it as echoes from a mouse or some other rodent that may have been wandering around the cave. I returned to the security room and began texting my advisor about the buried book that I had found. I stopped just as I was about to send the message, deciding that it would be pointless to contact her that late, and not to mention, she would more than likely try and take credit for my finding. So, unwilling to part ways with my discovery, I smuggled the old-timey book back home to read its contents. I couldn't believe it at first, but after reading a few of the journal entries, I was able to identify who it had belonged to. Hector, the brewery worker who'd survived the cave-in. I stayed up late that night reading, and I wouldn't be lying if I said I wasn't bored out of my mind and slightly disappointed. I had spent hours reading about some dude's day-to-day life. Other than its age, there wasn't anything remotely interesting about the journal. But as I began to doze off, I convinced myself to hold on to the book, at least until I was finished reading it. I arrived at work early the next night. Carlos, a guard on the ship before me, gave me a hasty greeting and darted off towards his locker. He was in more of a rush than usual. When I asked him about it, he hesitated before responding. "I can't believe I'm admitting this, but I'm starting to think that this place is actually haunted," he said. "You're kidding me, right?" I mocked him. "I thought you didn't believe in that crap. What made you change your mind?" His face paled as he seemed to search for the right words. "It started right after I locked up for the night. I saw something move in one of the feeds and I could have sworn it was a person. I went to investigate and I couldn't find anything. During the next 2 rounds, just before you arrived, I kept getting the feeling that I was being watched, and I swear, I heard someone whisper my name." "Please tell me you see the irony in that," I teased. First of all, there are cameras all over this place, so technically, you were being watched the entire time. And secondly, the whisper you heard was probably just a stray breeze entering the cave. They've been known to sound an awful lot like voices at times. I'm just saying. Fine, man, since you're going to be an ass about it, I guess you'll just have to see for yourself. Good night, Wes. He waved to me and sped out of the security room. My first walk through the site was uneventful, and after giving all the security feeds a good once over, I decided to read more from the journal to pass the time between rounds. It continued much the same as I left off, with him writing about his workdays, his family and his coworkers, and so on. But at the end of his entry for June 13th, 1899, 3 days before the cave-in, things finally got interesting. He mentioned that he and his 2 coworkers had heard scratching coming from behind one of the cavern walls. Thinking someone may have gotten lost or had gotten into trouble, they brought it up to their supervisor, who went over to the cave layout with them. After a short search and running over a few possible scenarios of what the noise could have been, they all drew the same conclusion that I had. They were just hearing rodents scraping against the cave. I glanced up briefly to check the security monitors, and then did a double take before shooting out of my chair to view one of the feeds more closely. The camera was pointed at the opening of a larger tunnel that was nicknamed Boat Alley. We call it that because halfway down the tunnel, there's an antique rowboat on display from when the caves were flooded many years back. A cold chill slowly crept over my body once I registered what I had just seen. Something or someone was in that tunnel, and I had seen them just before they disappeared completely under the boat. I pulled up the security log and I left a voice recording, doing my best to remain calm as I spoke. This is Wes Kellerman, ID 99009. The date is Monday, January 14th, 2016, and the time is 11:23 p.m. I'm documenting a possible break-in in Boat Alley, and I'm on my way to investigate. During the day, the tunnels are lit up like the 4th of July, with bulbs and light strips in every nook and cranny, so that the customers don't ever get too claustrophobic or trip over the uneven ground. At night, though, it's a whole different story. In order to save money, only the floor strips are left on and at the dimmest setting possible. It forces us guards on the night shift to rely on our flashlights for vision. I readied my light and my taser, pointed them at the upside-down boat, and stood a good 15 feet away. I ordered the intruder to come out multiple times, and each time I was answered by the whistling of wind as it crept past me. I cautiously inched closer to the small vessel, and after taking a deep breath, I dropped to the ground to peer underneath. "Asshole," I breathed to myself, as I read a note from Carlos taped to the underside of the boat. "Gotcha, see you at work tomorrow." Just in case Carlos had stuck around to scare me, I took extra precautions as I continued my rounds. I just reached the middle of my walkthrough near the cave-in site when I heard the loud clamor of rocks falling onto the floor behind me. I jumped around in surprise, shining my light just in time to see a beach ball-sized boulder tumble to the ground, breaking off from a considerably sized hole where it once was lodged. I gawked at the opening for a few minutes, allowing the cloud of dirt and dust to clear before observing the surrounding rocks for any structural damage. By the time I established it was safe, I was unable to contain my curiosity, and I peered into the narrow hole. It snaked for a few feet, widening as it went, before opening up into a larger chamber. A moment later, I was army crawling through the tunnel entrance and standing at the edge of the large cavern. What I saw was breathtaking. Stalagmites were speckled throughout the chamber, and each one glistened as the beam from my light reflected off the condensation that coated them. I made my way to the center of the room, and after winding around a couple of pillars, a small pond entered my limited field of vision. After examining the floor of the cavern, I immediately deduced that it must have been left over from when the caves were flooded. I didn't see them at first, but as I looked over the small pond, I noticed small flakes scattered in small piles around its edges. I carefully approached the tiny pool, trying my best to avoid kicking any loose flakes or sediment into it and disturbing its mirror-like appearance. Unlike the normal chambers, this one lacked the normal clutter of sound produced by plummeting water droplets and stray breezes finding their way through the cave's hidden orifices. It was completely sealed off from the outside world, and the silence it manufactured was unbelievably peaceful. The fact that I was standing in the tomb of 2 dead men never really occurred to me until now. I guess I was just too caught up in the moment to realize it then. Even now, picturing the unreal stillness of that pond brings upon a calmness I never knew existed. After what felt like hours, I reluctantly turned away from the pond to leave and I ran right into one of the stalagmites. I swore loudly in surprise as it split under my weight, taking the top half of the structure with me as I fell towards the ground. I braced myself, expecting to have the wind knocked out of me, but to my astonishment, the piece I was still clutching practically disintegrated against my body as it broke my fall. I quickly hopped to my feet and I was met by a terrible odor, one so foul that it's difficult to put into words. If I were to try to describe it, I'd say it smelled like a mix of spoiled milk, burnt rubber, and cigarette ashes. Needless to say, I threw up as soon as that stench hit my nostrils. I hurriedly covered my nose and mouth with my shirt to mask the smell as I went to investigate the source. If you're squeamish, I suggest you skip this part because there's no sugarcoating what I saw. The smell, as I'm sure you've guessed, was coming from the part of the stalagmite that was still standing. I shined my light at the now knee-high structure, doing my best to keep my distance while I studied what was left of it. The base wasn't thick and round like a normal stalagmite. This one had a bipod base that gradually merged into a single body, and it wasn't the only one either. After scanning the rest of the room, it was clear that they all shared the same unorthodox shape, and as soon as I fully examined one that was unscathed, it didn't take me very long to recognize their all too familiar shape. My breathing became labored as I viewed the remnants of the broken structure, hoping to disprove the thoughts running rampant through my mind. The inside was coated in a rust-like residue, and appeared to be hollow at first. I leaned forward to get a better view, and I noticed the entire base was filled with some sort of lumpy, muddy liquid. Using a pen, I flipped over and scraped off some of the liquid from one of the larger lumps. I let out what started as a soft whimper, and once I had fully processed what was in front of me, it instantly turned into an ear-splitting scream. The structures weren't stalagmites. They were people being used as some sort of shell to preserve their organs and covered in God knows what. I hauled ass out of that room and practically dove into the small tunnel, clawing desperately at the loose dirt as I scrambled through the narrow exit. I tumbled on the small mound of rubble at the tunnel's opening, and after hobbling to my feet, I sprinted towards the security office. I had reached the final stretch and was halfway across the elevated catwalk when I heard a series of light, metallic taps coming from behind me. I whipped around to illuminate the gated walkway before I scanned the rest of the small chamber. I held my breath and tried to listen past the white noise of my heart pounding and water droplets splashing. Suddenly, my flashlight flickered a few times and then burned out. I've had similar things happen to me in the past, where I'm partway through my routine and my light suddenly goes out. I just follow the light strips back to the office and replace my light, and then finish up where I left off. No biggie. But after my grim experience in the cavern, I felt guilty for blowing off my coworker Carlos. For the first time in my life, I was afraid of the dark, because in that moment I knew that I wasn't alone, and something was watching me. I took a step backwards and heard the noise again as it echoed off the cavern walls. It was like listening to someone tap their nails on a soda can. When I turned to make a run for it, a woman's voice called out from behind me in a soft whisper and it stopped me in my tracks. "Please stay, Wes." She begged as my flashlight began to flicker again. I whirled around and I pointed in the direction of the voice, hoping to find its source through the flickers of my light. "Don't leave me alone." The voice pleaded to me as 5 pale, willowy fingers emerged from holes in the metal floor grating, brandishing long, dagger-like claws that were blacker than obsidian. They clinked against the grating as each finger closed in around it. I ran as fast as possible, stumbling once or twice as I fumbled my way through the darkness. Once I reached the door to the guard's room, there was a series of loud metallic screeches, followed by the thunderous bang of something landing on the catwalk. I paused in front of the door to contemplate whether I should try to catch a glimpse of the thing pursuing me or not, and I immediately decided against it. I shoved the door open and nearly fell through the doorway, before slamming it shut and locking it behind me. I started to dial 911 on the security room phone, but stopped once I realized how crazy my story would sound. Frustrated, I slammed the phone down onto the receiver and I glared intensely at the door I just came through, as a young woman's voice crooned from the other side. "Wes, I promise I won't hurt you. It's so cold out here. Please, let me in. I'm so cold, Wes." It occurred to me at that moment that I should have just left the winery. The door to the lobby was only about 10 feet further down the corridor. I was in such a hurry to put a wall between me and that thing lurking underneath the catwalk. Leaving the building never came to mind. To think, I could have gone home, put in my resignation letter in the morning, and never came back to Luna Rosa. I took a deep breath to calm myself, despite how terrifying the idea was. I knew I had to figure out who or what exactly I was dealing with. I turned to view the camera monitors and my stomach dropped. All but one of the feeds were displaying static, and to make matters worse, when I tried to go over the old footage, I realized I'd forgotten to turn on the VCR recorder. Not only could I not view the footage from earlier, there was no video evidence of what had tampered with the cameras. And desperate for answers, I opened up Hector's journal once more and breezed over his last few entries. What I read not only terrified me, but confirmed everything I had experienced. On July 15th, 1899, Hector and his two cohorts were on their way out of the caves when Hector playfully shoved Ben. This caused him to fall into and through the same tunnel wall that I had been hearing noises through the other day. Breaking protocol, they decided to investigate the new chamber. It sounds familiar. On their own, each bringing their own lantern. The first thing they noticed were the hundreds of human-shaped stalagmites scattered throughout the chamber, and at the center of them all was the small pond. Ben and Daniel both wandered to the center of the chamber, while Hector observed the man-shaped structures. When they reached the pond, they found a naked woman lying at its edge with her lower half completely submerged. Figuring she was dead, they ordered Hector to get their supervisor. As he was leaving, he heard a woman's voice, followed by Daniel's scream as he came rushing towards him. He spurred him on, confused as to why Ben and the girl weren't with him. Daniel was only an arm's length away when a pale, clawed hand shot out from the darkness and grabbed his friend by the ankle. Terrified, Hector grabbed a nearby pickaxe and began chopping away at the opening at the cavern, causing the cave-in of 1899. Just before the opening was completely buried, Hector claimed he saw a stalagmite resembling Ben's figure at the edge of the pond, still holding his lit lantern. Behind that, he witnessed what he described as a creature that had the body of a woman from the waist up and the body of a demon from the waist down. It was caressing Ben from behind. A week later, he returned to the site in secret, just before he was taken to the asylum, and left his journal there as a warning for those who were willing to believe him. Not really knowing what to do next, I did the only thing I could think of at the time, which was sit and wait it out. Those next few hours were the longest of my life. The creature called to me in a whimpering female voice every few minutes, sounding weak and distressed at first, begging me to help her. After an hour or so, it tried a more seductive approach, again using the same female voice. It would moan my name over and over while tempting me with sexual fantasies I could only dream of if I opened the door for her. When the teasing didn't work, there was a brief window of silence before the creature began screaming and lashing out at the security room door. I vaguely remember wrapping my uniform around the top of my head, hoping to muffle the cacophony of scraping nails and ear-splitting shrieks that were being amplified by the surrounding cavern walls. The noises were so horrifyingly loud and painful. At one point, I actually contemplated opening the door just to make it stop. But then, just like that, it was dead silent. With my ears still ringing, I checked the time on my phone and realized that the opening crew would be in soon. Reluctantly, I got up out of the fetal position and removed myself from underneath the security desk, and then made my way to the rusty metal door on the other side of the room. I hesitantly pressed my face against its cool, rough surface, listening for any movement on the other side. "Hello, Wes, it's me." Carlos's voice echoed loudly, causing me to jump. "I accidentally left my smokes in the security room and I'm just coming to pick them up real quick." The door handle wiggled slightly as he tried to open the door, and then swore under his breath. "Hey man, the door's locked and I left my keys in my ride. Could you get the door for me?" Yeah, I muttered. Sorry, bud, it's been a long time. I reached for the lock and I froze. The voice was his, sure, but I had two good reasons to believe it wasn't Carlos behind the door. 1, Carlos didn't smoke. And 2, he didn't own a ride, which I knew because he always bragged about how he'd bike to work every day. I pretended to unlock the door, and a millisecond later, there was a thunderous bang as the creature tried to plow through the door I thought was open. Reverting back to the woman's voice from before, it cackled maniacally and slowly with each passing second. It began to fade. Thinking it was returning back to the depths of the cave, I grabbed my things and without hesitation, seized my opportunity to leave. I darted out of the security room and up the stone steps. I burst through the door to the main lobby and sprinted out of the front entrance to my car. When I got home, the first thing I went for was the pistol I kept in my nightstand, before barricading myself in the bedroom. Later that evening, I was woken up by the sound of my ringing phone. I fumbled around trying to find it, but by the time I did, I had already missed the call. I had 30 missed calls and voicemails and 20 text messages from my boss. I figured she would be upset at me. I left without locking up, and I can only imagine what the security door looked like after the creature handled it for hours on end, not to mention the large hole at the cave inside. I figured I had a lot of explaining to do. When I called her back, though, things did not go as expected. When I started to confront her about the things mentioned, she told me that everything was locked up tight and made no mention about the cave inside or the security room. She asked if I could come back to the Luna Rosa for questioning by the police. It took everything I had to muster the strength to do so, but I did as I was asked. When I arrived, I was directed to the security room, where the police were waiting for me. I stopped briefly just before I entered the room to observe the door, and to my horror, there wasn't a single scratch on it. Then, as I walked in, I caught a glimpse of the security feeds. All of them were working perfectly and the hole in the cave in sight was no longer there. The police interrogated me for about an hour, with most of the questions centered around Carlos. When was the last time I had seen him, and what was his attitude like, and so on. Apparently Carlos had never made it home after his work shift. His wife thought he might have went to the bar afterwards with some friends, but after calling around and finding out none of them had seen him, she made the call to the police. This is where things got even more creepy. The security footage showed Carlos leave the security room like normal, then sneak back into the caves while I wasn't looking. He then made his way to the boat alley and crawled underneath the old boat. They played my audio report about the intruder at this point in time. As I was leaving the security room, a couple of rocks fell from the cave in sight, leaving a small tunnel behind, and Carlos left his hiding spot to investigate the noise. The video showed him crawl into a tiny tunnel, and shortly after, it collapsed with him still inside. They apologized for the formalities, but they needed to rule out foul play and offered me the condolences. Once I got the okay to go, I left without saying another word. When I got home, I went straight to my computer and began typing out this message. It's taken me almost a month to write it because I can still hardly believe what had happened. The recording from that night, the one the police had found, shouldn't have even existed, seeing as I had forgotten to turn on the video recorder. I don't know how, but the creature must have tampered with the footage and somehow repaired the damage it had made to the security room door. I know it all sounds insane, but it's the truth. At least I think it is. I couldn't have hallucinated the whole thing. Could I? If I'm not going completely batshit crazy, that means some paranormal creature is going around kidnapping people, storing them in the cave and covering it up. Think about it for a second. There were hundreds of people in there. Just how old is that thing? How long has it been holed up in that cave, waiting to pick off some unfortunate passerby? I have a lot of questions, but I sure am hell am not going to stick around to find the answers and be labeled as a whack job or worse, turned into human jerky. I put in my 2 weeks notice right away and used what was left of my PTO days so that I never had to return to that god-awful place. But that doesn't change the fact that my mind still does. Almost every night, I can hear her, calling to me, begging me to return, like some sick siren song playing over and over in my head. Now, if this tale wasn't enough to keep you away, I can't physically stop you from going there, and I wish you the best. But to those who were willing to listen, please, heed my warning and stay away from the Luna Rosa.